directing myself, because I had somebody who was just, it's like the difference between driving, maybe like a Toyota Camry, no offense to Toyota.
I'm honored, truly honored, because what we're unpacking here isn't just gossip. It's something layered, weighty, and rooted in creative control and trust. And all along, while so many speculated that Blake Lively wanted the rights for herself, with some even whispering that she might step beyond acting and slide into the director's chair, the deeper truth may be simpler, sharper, and harder to digest. Perhaps Colleen Hoover never wanted to give up the rights to the sequel in the first place. Perhaps she held them close as a kind of shield, knowing full well how much power they carried. And that's where the storm begins. Welcome back to PopStream, where the drama burns hotter than any summer blockbuster, where whispers turn into headlines overnight. And right now, Colleen Hoover, the queen of contemporary romance, the voice of a generation of readers who underline her quotes like scripture, is caught in turmoil that feels less like industry maneuvering and more like a gut-punch betrayal. Can anyone really fault her for being shaken? She's staring down what looks like a deliberate undercut. The sting delivered not by some faceless studio executive, but by Blake Lively, a woman she trusted, a collaborator who was supposed to be an ally. If you haven't been keeping pace with the twist, here's the picture. Justin Baldoni wasn't just a passing Hollywood name orbiting Hoover's world. He was handpicked, chosen with intention. To direct It Ends With Us, the cinematic adaptation of her best-selling novel that fans don't just read, they cling to, treat like a lifeline, quote in their captions, and defend like it's sacred text. For years, there was an almost feverish anticipation. Readers spinning theories about casting, about aesthetic, about the emotional punches they hoped the film would land. And that collective dream seemed for a time like it was finally within reach. But dreams in Hollywood rarely glide to the screen untouched, and instead of unfolding like the fairy tale fans imagined, this adaptation is twisted into something darker, a project veering off course, spiraling under the weight of conflicting visions, egos, and contractual knots. And now, instead of triumph, what lies before Hoover is a battlefield of alliances fractured, a film once meant to honor her story morphing into something unrecognizable. And the fallout, sharp, messy, and merciless, is uglier than anyone on the outside could have ever predicted. Sources close to the production whisper that Justin Baldoni never saw this coming. He walked into the project believing he was on steady ground, believing that the adaptation of It Ends With Us was in safe, steady hands, and that everyone involved shared the same mission, to honor Colleen Hoover's story. But what he thought was stability was, in truth, a mirage. Beneath the surface, visions clashed, alliances fractured, and what should have been a dream collaboration curdled into chaos. Fans saw the first cracks before anyone admitted them. The moment leak set photos hit the internet, outrage spread like wildfire. Casting choices felt wrong. Costumes looked off. Even the overall aesthetic rang false. Readers had waited years to see Lily Bloom on screen, but instead of a character in her 20s, they saw someone who looked nearly a decade older. Instead of raw, emotional portrayal that mirrored the novel's heartache, what they saw felt cold, detached, and theatrical. Questions piled up fast, and with them came suspicion. Why did everything feel so far removed from the emotional core of the novel? Why did it feel like Hollywood had hollowed it out? Now, the betrayal narrative doesn't just feel plausible, it feels inevitable. Rumors swirl that Blake Lively never had Hoover's story at heart at all. Insiders whisper that she pushed aggressively for sweeping changes that stripped away the book's raw themes of abuse, survival, and healing, reshaping it into something glossy and unrecognizable. Baldoni resisted. He wanted to keep the grit, the honesty, the unflinching edge of Hoover's writing. But instead of collaboration, he was allegedly met with stone walls and sharp elbows. Instead of working with him, Blake moved against him. Reports claim he was promised partnership, creative freedom, the ability to shape the film with integrity. But those promises, it seems, were hollow. Decision after decision slipped out his hands. By the time he realized how little power he truly had, it was too late. The project had already been pulled into a direction he no longer recognized. The fallout has been volcanic. Fans, once ecstatic, now rage online. Social media feeds are flooded with furious posts, edits, and hashtags dragging the production. The phrase, "It doesn't end with us, it ends with Hollywood," trended for days. Many argue that what's being filmed isn't Hoover's novel at all, but some uncanny imitation. A story wearing the skin of her book while hollowing out everything inside that mattered. Baldoni loyalists have rallied, defending him fiercely, unwilling to let what they see as a smear job stand. And through all of this noise, all of this uproar, Colleen Hoover and Blake Lively have maintained a silence so calculated it feels sinister. No statements, no clarifications, no interviews to steady the ship. PR veterans, watching from the sidelines, say it's a strategy. Weather the storm, let the internet scream itself hoarse, and wait for the fire to burn out on its own. But behind the curtain, darker whispers linger. Some suggest Hoover herself may have been the architect of this takedown all along, that she plotted with Blake, building a case against Baldoni in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to edge him out. Sources even describe her behavior as erratic, unhinged, driven less by logic than by an obsession with keeping control of her creation no matter the cost. They claim she didn't care if Baldoni's career was collateral damage. He was a casualty in her war for ownership. And with Blake's influence, her Hollywood clout, and her calculated moves, Hoover pulled off what some are calling one of the slickest behind-the-scenes power plays in recent memory. With one decisive maneuver, Baldoni was sidelined, and Hoover secured the reins to her project, cementing her dominance. This isn't the first time her name has been tied to controversy either. Critics point to Hoover's history of dodging accountability, her silence during personal scandals involving her family, her reluctance to address criticism head-on, her habit of letting fires burn themselves out rather than putting them out directly. To those critics, this maneuver isn't shocking. It's a pattern. Deflect, redirect, consolidate power. And while the truth of those accusations is murky, perception alone is damning. Once readers start questioning whether an author is protecting her art or protecting herself, trust begins to fracture. So where does that leave the movie? Officially, it's still alive, camera is still rolling, contract still binding. But the bigger, uglier question is whether fans will show up. Hoover's readers aren't casual moviegoers. They're diehards. They highlight her books, tattoo her quotes, evangelize her stories to friends. If they feel betrayed, if they believe this adaptation has gutted the story they cherish, they won't just skip the film. They'll boycott it, loudly, collectively, and in today's brutal box office climate, that kind of organized resistance can sink a release overnight. It's a heartbreaking irony, considering what this project was supposed to be, a dream partnership between a best-selling author, a passionate director, and an actress with enough star power to bring Hoover's words to life on the biggest stage. Instead, it's devolved into a cautionary tale about trust gone sour, about the corrosive grip of control, and about the ruthless politics that govern Hollywood's shadows. To understand the tragedy, you have to rewind to the beginning. Back in 2019, Before It Ends With Us went viral on TikTok, and before Hoover's name became shorthand for contemporary romance, Baldoni saw something in the novel. He reached out directly to Hoover, pouring his heart out about how deeply the story moved him. He told her he believed in its message, in its themes, in its ability to reach people who needed it most. He wanted to help bring that to life on screen. Hoover, thrilled by his enthusiasm, matched his excitement beat for beat. Their early exchanges were filled with light laughter and promise. She even joked about Baldoni himself playing Ryle, the male lead. What began then looked like a genuine, pure partnership, two creatives bound by mutual respect and passion. But that promise has burned away. What was once a bond has been reduced to ash. What once united them, a story about survival, healing, and love, has become the very weapon splitting them apart. Whether Hoover orchestrated betrayal, whether Blake steamrolled Baldoni, or whether the truth lies somewhere in a murky, ugly middle, the damage is irreversible. The dream has been poisoned, the trust shattered, and the legacy of this adaptation may forever be remembered not as a triumph, but as a warning of just how quickly Hollywood can turn creation into
I was in labor for 36 hours. And so I wanted that birth scene to feel so real.
The fans have seen behind the curtain now, and once you've glimpsed the machinery, the seams, the manipulation, it can't be unseen. The illusion shatters, and suddenly every move looks calculated. Every silence feels loaded. So buckle up, because this isn't just about one movie anymore. It's about how Hollywood chews up even its most passionate players, How even those who believe they're safeguarding a story can be swallowed by power games. And the sequence begins innocently enough, with Colleen Hoover herself singing Justin Baldoni's praises in interviews, vowing she'd trust him anywhere, follow him anywhere. He, in turn, seemed deeply loyal, recounting stories of fatherhood and family, anchoring himself as the kind of director who understood the themes of love, loss, and resilience that her readers cherished. That bond looked unshakable. But fast forward to casting, and the cracks began to show. Colleen, whose word carried weight with the studio, personally recommended Blake lively for Lily Bloom. She said she admired her work, saw something in her presence that felt right for the role. Justin, ever the peacemaker and eager to respect Colleen's instincts, agreed without hesitation. It was a decision that would come back to haunt him. Because here's the kicker. Blake wasn't the only one cornering Justin. Colleen herself had been maneuvering behind the scenes, sliding into a position of control she hadn't initially claimed. And while Baldoni has long projected the image of being agreeable, warm, the kind of guy who can get along with anyone, this was the moment where pleasing everyone was no longer an option. Then came the shocking twist. For months, everything appeared smooth between Colleen and Justin. They spoke with mutual respect, shared the same excitement, painted a picture of unity around the adaptation. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, Colleen flipped. She abandoned Justin and threw her weight squarely behind Blake. The jaw-dropper? Blake hadn't even read the book before she was cast. She admitted she didn't know who Colleen Hoover was. She had no personal connection to the material, no history with the story's themes. And yet, Colleen chose to side with her, defending her choices and, in doing so, undercutting the man who had championed the novel from day one. When backlash began to mount online, Colleen vanished. No explanations, no clarifications, no defense, just silence. She evaporated from social media, retreating while chaos burned across Twitter threads, TikTok edits, and Instagram comments. Justin and his supporters were left stranded, fighting on their own as fans begged for answers. That silence was damning. It spoke louder than words. And as the story deepened, darker accounts emerged from behind the scenes. On one especially tense day, insiders claimed that while Colleen mingled upstairs with cast members, Justin and his family were kept in the basement, effectively locked out of critical conversations, excluded from the circle that should have been theirs. For a man who believed he was protecting the soul of the story, that kind of exile wasn't just betrayal. It was crushing. Fans didn't miss a beat. They dragged Colleen across comment sections and forums, accusing her of throwing Justin under the bus to elevate Blake, who, let's be honest, carried the kind of Hollywood star power Colleen couldn't resist. To them, it looked like a cynical calculation. Sacrifice a director who had poured his heart into the project in exchange for the glow of a bigger name on the poster. When the situation exploded publicly, Colleen still refused to address it. No posts, no statements, just absence. That vacuum only made fans more furious, fueling conspiracy theories and souring what should have been a celebratory moment for her career. But the spiral didn't stop there. Around the same time, Colleen made one of the most tone-deaf business moves imaginable. This is, after all, the author who has repeatedly said Ends With Us was inspired by her own parents' marriage, the trauma they endured, the heartbreak they survived. The book was marketed as deeply personal, raw, grounded in lived pain. And yet, she tried to commercialize that very story by releasing a coloring book. Yes, a coloring book based on themes of domestic abuse and emotional scars. Fans were horrified. Outrage poured in, calling the move insensitive, exploitative, even grotesque. Within days, the backlash was so fierce she had no choice but to pull the product entirely, yanking it from shelves and issuing quiet apologies through intermediaries. The damage, though, was already done to her critics. It confirmed what they'd suspected, that Colleen was more interested in control and profit than in honoring the gravity of her story. What began as a dream collaboration, a best-selling author, a passionate director, and a household name actress, has now unraveled into a mess of betrayal, silence, and missteps that fans won't soon forget. The curtain has been pulled back, and what's revealed is not the fairy tale of artistic unity, but the machinery of Hollywood politics. Strategic silences, calculated betrayals, and the cold reality that in the end, passion often gets chewed up by power. For many fans, the coloring book stunt wasn't just a misstep. It was a flashing neon sign that Colleen Hoover had become painfully out of touch with the very audience that had built her empire. To them, it revealed a disconnect so jarring that it raised bigger questions about her motives and mindset. Suddenly, speculation began to circulate. Had Colleen been quietly harboring bitterness over where the film rights had been handled? After all, she sold those rights before it endless exploded on TikTok, before it became a viral juggernaut, a cultural phenomenon that transcended book clubs and turned her into a household name. When the book went stratospheric, Justin Baldoni still held the rights. He was steering the adaptation, sitting on a gold mine, while Colleen realized she had effectively cut herself out of potentially millions. Insiders suggest that resentment took root early, and over time, it festered. Every opportunity that landed in Justin's lap, every headline connecting his name to her story, may have felt like salt in the wound. To some close to the situation, that resentment explained everything. Why Colleen suddenly pivoted away from Justin, why she backed Blake Lively so aggressively, why she seemed determined to reclaim control of a project she had once willingly surrendered. In her mind, Justin wasn't just a collaborator anymore. He was competition, profiting from something she believed should have been hers to control completely. Still, unlike Blake, Colleen at least made an attempt, however clumsy, to manage the fallout. Pulling the coloring book was her way of saving face, her version of damage control. It was a tacit admission that she had miscalculated, that she had gone too far in commodifying trauma. But if she hoped the gesture would quiet the storm, the opposite happened. The coloring book controversy opened the door for a deeper, darker conversation, one that shifted away from her professional decisions and toward her personal life. That's when the whispers began circulating with force, dragging her name into territory far more serious than tone-deaf marketing. Those whispers centered on her son. Allegations surfaced that he had assaulted a 16-year-old girl he met on Snapchat, a girl he knew was still in high school. According to accounts, the teenager, traumatized, desperate, and looking for support, reached out to Colleen herself. She expected empathy, perhaps even protection, from an author who had built her entire career on stories of abuse, survival, and resilience. This was Colleen Hoover, the writer whose novels fans underline for strength, the figure who had become synonymous with giving voice to the silenced. But the story took a gutting turn. Instead of compassion, instead of listening, Colleen allegedly blocked the girl. Imagine that. A woman who had made millions by centering fictional survivors allegedly silenced a real one when the story hit too close to home. And when Colleen was finally confronted, she didn't lean into accountability. She didn't express sorrow or even acknowledge the pain that had been alleged. Instead, she went on the defensive. She denied the claims outright, insisting they were fabrications, and doubled down by protecting her son's reputation at all costs. To critics, this was hypocrisy in its rawest form. To fans, it was betrayal on a level that stung deeper than any casting controversy or coloring book fiasco. The author who preached healing and empowerment had allegedly turned her back on the very principles she built her empire on. When Colleen finally broke her silence, her words landed with a thud. She issued a statement that read less like heartfelt compassion and more like legal maneuvering. I apologized, thanked her for bringing it up, and offered our lawyer's contact information. On the surface, she tried to frame it as accountability, but to fans it felt hollow, transactional, and disturbingly hypocritical. And that hypocrisy is the breaking point. Because how, they asked, can someone build an empire writing about survivors, profit from their pain and healing, and then turn her back when faced with a real survivor in her own life? How can she fill pages with rallying cries for strength, self-worth, and integrity, yet vanish or deflect whenever reality demands the same courage? By this stage, the internet's verdict was unforgiving. Colleen wasn't just being called careless anymore. She was being branded shady. Between the betrayal of Justin Baldoni, the questionable alliance with Blake Lively, the tone-deaf coloring book fiasco, and the disturbing allegations involving her son, Colleen Hoover's carefully curated image as the empathetic champion of survivors was unraveling in real time. And rather than address the mounting controversies head-on, she disappeared. She ghosted her fans, wiped her presence from social media, and left the storm to rage unchecked. What had begun as a messy movie production had now spiraled into something bigger. Questions of credibility, integrity, and whether the woman who wrote so movingly about trauma was, in fact, living the opposite. With each revelation, the narrative shifted further. Colleen stopped looking like a victim of Hollywood's brutal politics, and more like a willing participant in the manipulations that scorched others. And here's the kicker. Fans started connecting the dots. They realized her glowing public praise for Blake. Words like honest, kind, patient, and supportive, posted just as accusations against Justin surfaced, might not have been random flattery. To some, it looked like part of a calculated, well-timed campaign to discredit Baldoni while elevating Blake. Suddenly, Colleen's timing wasn't seen as gracious. It was seen as opportunistic. Receipts surfaced. Contradictions piled up. The drama escalated with every leaked text, every anonymous source, every new thread that went viral. What began as a dream adaptation of a beloved novel had devolved into one of Hollywood's most tangled webs of betrayal, hypocrisy, and scandal. And standing squarely at the center of it was Colleen Hoover herself. Meanwhile, Blake Lively, once hailed as the glamorous face of the adaptation, wasn't escaping unscathed either. Colleen had praised her publicly, called her generous, thanked her for being such a nice human. But behind the scenes, a darker portrait was emerging. According to multiple leaks, this was the same Blake who had allegedly driven the adaptation into chaos, not out of devotion to material, but out of a hunger for control. Rather than fighting to preserve the soul of Hoover's novel, insiders claimed she fixated on surface-level aesthetics, the costumes, the sets, the Instagrammable vibe of it all. She flexed her Hollywood muscle at every turn, reportedly bullying writers into scrapping entire scenes, forcing rewrites, and leaving production paralyzed in disarray. What was supposed to be a faithful, heartfelt retelling had become something else entirely, a battleground where power plays mattered more than authenticity, where survivor stories were treated as leverage, and where the people once trusted to bring a book to life instead fracture it beyond recognition. Fans aren't just disappointed anymore. They're enraged, and their rage is rewriting the legacy of everyone involved. Now let's zoom out. When you pull back far enough, the entire situation stops looking like a simple series of unfortunate events or creative disagreements, and instead begins to resemble a meticulously staged drama, a slow-moving but carefully orchestrated mission aimed at dismantling Justin Baldoni's credibility, while elevating Colleen Hoover and Blake Lively into positions of unchecked power. What seemed like chaos on the surface, missed deadlines, lawsuits, shifting loyalties, starts to line up too neatly, like pieces falling into place on a board that someone has been arranging all along. Consider the timing. Blake makes her move, filing a lawsuit at the precise moment when production tensions are at their highest. Almost instantly, Colleen rushes in to back her up, lending her credibility and authorial weight to the claims, giving Blake's words a kind of moral force they might not have carried on their own. Then comes Justin's counterstrike, not with vague denials, but with hard evidence, receipts, documents, texts, concrete proof that directly contradicts Blake's accusations. Instead of engaging, instead of defending her prior stance, Colleen goes silent. Her voice, once loud and ever present, evaporates. It's a silence that doesn't feel accidental. It feels strategic, as if she knows that speaking now could unravel the narrative she's worked to build. That silence only became more suspicious when Justin's attorney, Brian Friedman, began hinting at subpoenas, the kind that don't just skim the surface but dig deep into the private, digital underworld of conversations, emails, and hidden negotiations. Suddenly, everything was at risk of exposure. And right at that boiling point, Colleen's entire Instagram account vanished overnight. No warning, no explanation, just gone. To her millions of followers, the disappearance felt less like a retreat and more like a cover-up, the digital equivalent of sweeping documents off a desk before investigators arrive. And so the question burned hotter. What exactly was she trying to erase? Because this wasn't just about an author stepping away from social media. It was about someone potentially scrubbing their tracks before the world could connect the dots. The deeper you look, the more this saga reveals itself to be about more than a film adaptation. It's about control, about who gets to own not just a story on paper, but the story that plays out in public perception. Colleen Hoover didn't want to be a passive observer while her book was adapted. She wanted leverage, authority, the ability to dictate how her story lived and breathed on screen. And when an opportunity arose, whether through Blake's carefully timed claims or the chaos they unleashed, she seized it. Add in the sudden whispers of Colleen considering retirement, and the picture grows even darker. Was she genuinely exhausted, ready to leave the spotlight on her own terms? Or was she slipping away strategically, retreating from visibility before the fallout of unreleased information could collapse everything she had built? And then comes the possibility that turns the entire narrative upside down. What if Colleen wasn't the mastermind at all, but the mark? What if Blake Lively was the true architect of this implosion, the one weaving the threads, while Colleen played her part unwittingly? Blake, with her Hollywood pedigree and sharp instincts, could easily have positioned herself as the sympathetic heroine, confiding in Colleen, whispering about how unsafe Justin made her feel, framing herself as vulnerable yet brave. If Colleen believed her, then her loyalty becomes understandable, even if tragically misplaced. But if Blake exaggerated or worse, fabricated, the entire picture changes. Suddenly, Colleen isn't just complicit. She's compromised, manipulated into amplifying a narrative designed to sideline Justin and consolidate power. Whether Colleen was the puppet or the puppeteer, the outcome remains the same. Justin Baldoni, once the champion of bringing the story to life with integrity, was left isolated, vilified, and cornered, while Colleen and Blake moved forward with more control than ever before. The longer this plays out, the less it resembles a troubled production, and the more it reads like a Hollywood conspiracy thriller, complete with betrayals, power plays, vanishing acts, and carefully timed bombshells. At its core, this was never just about it